She kicked her father and his adopted black son out onto the street without ever looking inside his old suitcase. A week later, at the funeral, the lawyer read the will, and what happened next shocked everyone. Subscribe and comment below where you're watching from. The sun had long since ceased to warm the creaking porch of the old house where Harold Turner lived. Once painted a gentle shade of blue, the wooden boards had faded into a dull, cracked gray. The shutters no longer closed properly. The front steps leaned as if weary from bearing the same weight over and over again, and the mailbox hung open on its rusted hinge like a yawning mouth too tired to shut. Inside, the air was still, heavy with the scent of aged wood and dust, the kind of dust that settles not just on surfaces, but on time itself. Harold, 82 years old, moved slowly through his living room, dragging his hand along the edge of a console table where photographs sat, framed in tarnished silver. In one, he stood proudly with his wife, Helen, a woman whose laughter once echoed in every room, now reduced to a faint whisper in his memory. Her passing 12 years ago had silenced the house, left it suspended in a kind of soft mourning that never really ended. He had kept her chair in its place by the fireplace, the knitted shawl she always wore still draped over the back. Some days he swore he could see the impression of her figure in the cushion. There were other photos, too. Carol, their eldest daughter, stiff in a school uniform, already with her chin slightly lifted, eyes detached. Thomas, their son, holding a soccer ball, freckles and fire in his grin, and Laura, the youngest, clinging to Helen's leg, her curls wild, her smile uncertain. They had all grown, flown, built lives of their own. He rarely heard from them. The last Christmas card had come 3 years ago, a generic printout with everyone smiling too perfectly in front of a ski lodge. No handwritten message, just best wishes, the Turners. He didn't resent them, not fully. He told himself they were busy, successful, raising children of their own. He had wanted them to live big lives, to break away from small-town constraints. But still, a part of him ached. He had built this house with his own hands, every beam nailed with purpose, every stone in the fireplace placed with care. It was supposed to be their family's foundation, but foundations meant nothing if no one returned to stand on them. Outside, the trees bent slightly in the wind, their leaves rustling like secrets. Harold sat down heavily in his armchair, the one facing the window. His bones protested, knees clicking into place. He reached for the cup of tea that had long since gone cold and brought it to his lips out of habit. The taste was faint, but it was something to hold on to. That and the chessboard set up beside him, mid-game, one knight askew as though paused mid-charge. Across from it, an empty chair waited. He turned his gaze toward the hallway, then toward the back of the house. He listened. There were footsteps, light ones. Then the soft sound of a door creaking open. "Jay?" he called, voice thin, brittle. A figure appeared in the doorway, tall, lean, with skin the color of rich soil and eyes too old for someone so young. Jaden, 19 now, entered with a cautious expression, carrying a tray with fresh tea and a sandwich. His clothes were plain, his sleeves rolled up to the elbows. His presence filled the room like sunlight breaking through a clouded sky. "Still playing that same game?" he asked, setting the tray down. "Waiting for you to make your move," Harold said, a ghost of a smile on his face. Jaden had come into Harold's life 15 years ago. A child, just 10 then, found curled up on the edge of a bus bench during the first cold snap of autumn. No parents in sight, no name at first, just big, frightened eyes and a backpack with a broken zipper. Harold had brought him home that night, gave him soup, a bath, and a blanket. And, for reasons he couldn't fully explain, he never let him go. The decision had not gone over well. Carol had called it a reckless, emotional stunt. Thomas had said he was just trying to replace Mom. Laura, through gritted teeth, told him he was ruining what was left of their family name. Eventually, the visits stopped. Phone calls grew less frequent. When Harold legally adopted Jaden 2 years later, the final thread snapped. But Jaden had stayed. He was the one who remembered to take the trash out on Mondays, who learned how to change the batteries in Harold's hearing aids, who put a hand on his back every time he stood up. Jaden read to him when his vision blurred, argued gently when Harold got stubborn, and laughed at his dry, muttered jokes even when no one else would. Now, as the fall wind began to rattle the windows, Harold winced, bringing a shaky hand to his chest. "You all right?" Jaden asked quickly. "Just cold," Harold murmured. Jaden adjusted the old wool blanket over his legs and glanced at the teacup. "I'll warm this up." "No," Harold said, catching his arm. "Stay." Jaden nodded and sat down. They watched the birds gather on the back fence. Feathers puffed against the cold. Silence stretched between them, but it was not empty. It was a silence that spoke of shared days, of long walks to the hardware store, meals cooked together, and birthday cakes with just 2 candles, one for each of them. Eventually, Harold had cleared his throat. "I've been thinking," he said. "This house, it's not much anymore." "It's home," Jaden said. Harold smiled, but it faded quickly. "I'm not well, Jay." Jaden's jaw tightened. He said nothing. "I fell again this morning," Harold continued. "Bathroom. Didn't even feel dizzy, just went down." Jaden's eyes dropped to the floor. "We need to go into the city," Harold said softly. "Closer to doctors, to people." Jaden hesitated, then nodded. "Okay." Harold exhaled, almost relieved. "I was thinking maybe Carol would let us stay for a bit, just until we figure things out." Jaden stiffened, but didn't object. He had seen the unopened envelopes from Carol, the way Harold always placed them on the shelf, but never threw them away. He knew the old man's hope hadn't entirely died, even if the rest of the family had turned their backs years ago. "I'll pack tonight," Jaden said finally. Harold's eyes brightened just a little. "Good boy." That evening, Jaden found the old suitcase in the closet, the one with the faded leather handle and a tag that read Turner, H, in worn letters. He dusted it off and opened it to see if it was still usable. Inside, nestled between old jackets and papers, were several heavy envelopes, a velvet box, and a manila folder tied with red ribbon. Jaden's hand hovered over them, but he closed the case without touching anything. That wasn't his place. Not yet. The next morning, Jaden helped Harold dress, buttoned his sweater, and walked him slowly to the car. They didn't speak much on the drive. The trees passed in blurs of gold and copper, and the road wound its way toward a future neither of them could quite see. The city rose like a wall of noise and movement, foreign and uninviting. When they reached the neighborhood where Carol lived, everything seemed glassy and cold. Sharp-edged buildings, manicured lawns with no soliciting signs, motion sensor lights that blinked at even the gentlest step. Carol's house stood at the end of the cul-de-sac, a gleaming structure of steel and stone. Jaden parked the car, helped Harold out, and together they walked to the door, the suitcase rolling behind them. They rang the bell. It chimed like a cathedral bell, too formal, too loud. Footsteps echoed inside. Then the door opened. Carol stood before them in a cream-colored blouse and pearl earrings, her hair pinned tightly back. Her mouth parted slightly when she saw them, but she quickly schooled her expression into something neutral. "Dad," she said, glancing from him to Jaden and back again. "Carol," Harold whispered, "it's good to see you." She nodded stiffly. "Come in." As they stepped over the threshold, something shifted. The warmth of the car ride, the comfort of shared silence was replaced by something sharper. The temperature didn't drop, but the air felt colder. Carol led them through a sterile hallway into a sitting room that looked like a showroom. Chrome accents, leather furniture that no one had ever sunk into, a fireplace that flickered from a wall-mounted screen rather than burning real wood. Harold looked around, disoriented. Jaden remained by the door, feeling the weight of Carol's gaze. "You didn't say he was coming," she said flatly. "He's with me," Harold said. Carol pressed her lips together, then forced a smile. "Of course." They sat, awkwardly, on the edge of a leather couch that hissed beneath them. Harold coughed into a tissue. Jaden looked straight ahead, his back straight. The quiet was no longer comforting. It was a warning. And though neither of them said it aloud, they both felt it. They were not welcome here. But they had nowhere else to go. Not yet. Not anymore. And so, the next chapter of their journey began, with tension in the air, the weight of years behind them, and a suitcase full of secrets waiting to be opened. Carol's house was silent. Too silent. Even as the front door clicked shut behind Harold and Jaden, the hush that fell over them was not one of peace or comfort, but something closer to judgment. Every surface gleamed, polished to a cold perfection. The air carried a faint, expensive scent, perhaps some citrus and leather designer fragrance sprayed into the vents, but beneath it lingered something sharper. Disapproval. Harold's hand tightened slightly on Jaden's arm as they were led down the hallway. He walked slower now, more unsteady than even the day before, and Jaden felt every step of it. The older man's weight seemed heavier, his breath shallower, as if the walls of the house themselves pressed in on him. The hallway was long and sterile, decorated with abstract prints and minimalist furniture. Nothing personal, no warmth, no pictures of childhood, no signs of memory. Carol led them into a guest room at the far end of the hallway. It was immaculate, like a hotel room no one had ever used. The bed was perfectly made, the windows sealed shut, the curtains drawn precisely. There were 2 neatly folded towels on the edge of the bed and a bottle of water placed on the nightstand as if anticipating a quick departure. "This will do for the night," she said without looking at them. "There's a bathroom through that door. Please keep it clean." Harold nodded faintly. "Thank you, Carol. It means a lot." Carol only offered a curt nod and turned on her heel, her heels tapping briskly on the hardwood floor as she disappeared down the hallway. The sound echoed, hollow and final. Jaden helped Harold onto the edge of the bed and sat beside him, waiting for the old man to regain his breath. The room, for all its pristine appearance, felt like a box. Jaden could hear every creak of the house, the air conditioning switching on, the distant murmur of Carol's voice on the phone in another room, even the muffled thump of her teenage children's footsteps upstairs. It wasn't that the house was inhospitable in a physical sense. It was something deeper. They weren't guests here. They were intrusions. Harold reached out and patted Jaden's hand, his fingers trembling slightly. "She let us in," he said with a brittle kind of hope. Jaden didn't reply. He wanted to believe that meant something. He wanted to think there was a chance this arrangement might stretch beyond the narrow boundaries Carol had placed on it. But he'd seen her face when she opened the door. The pause, the frown disguised as a smile, the glance at him that lasted a beat too long. She hadn't let them in because she wanted to. She had done it out of obligation, the kind that barely held for a single night. Later that evening, Carol's husband, David, returned from work. He was a tall man, well-groomed and soft-spoken with the calm demeanor of someone used to navigating around tension. When he saw Harold, he greeted him with a warm handshake, genuine if cautious. When introduced to Jaden, he offered a polite nod, not warm, but not cold either. He noticed the dynamic immediately. The way Carol kept her distance, how she tensed slightly whenever Jaden was nearby. Dinner was brief. Carol had not cooked, but had instead ordered in from a local restaurant, plating the food as if it were homemade. The table was large and modern, set with utensils that looked unused. Harold tried to engage in conversation, asking about the children, the neighborhood, the business David had mentioned once. His questions were met with short answers. The children, 2 boys aged 12 and 9, barely looked up from their tablets, only glancing occasionally at Jaden with curiosity that bordered on discomfort. Jaden remained mostly silent, eating slowly, feeling each movement under scrutiny. Carol didn't speak to him directly once. When dinner was over, Carol stood and began collecting plates, not waiting for offers of help. Jaden rose and moved to assist, but she waved him off with a sharp gesture. "Guests shouldn't touch the kitchen," she said, not unkindly, but firmly. David watched this exchange with a glance between them that said more than his words could. Back in the guest room, Harold settled into the bed slowly, exhaling deeply as he sank into the mattress. Jaden adjusted the blanket over his legs, then sat beside him, looking out at the window that opened only a crack, barred by a child-proof latch. "She hasn't changed much," Harold said softly. Jaden gave a tight smile. "Neither have you." They both laughed, but it faded quickly into silence. The next morning, Jaden awoke early. The house was still dark, but the thin line of morning light pushed through the edges of the curtains. He showered quietly, trying not to wake Harold, and tiptoed to the kitchen in hopes of making breakfast before anyone else rose. He had just cracked eggs into a pan when Carol entered. She was already dressed, her makeup applied, her phone in one hand. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice sharp with surprise. Jaden turned, startled. "I thought I'd make breakfast." "This isn't your home," she said, lowering her phone. "I have a routine. I don't need people in my kitchen without asking." "I'm sorry," Jaden said, turning off the stove immediately. "I didn't mean to." "It's fine," she said, already moving past him. "Just don't. Not again." Jaden retreated without another word. Back in the guest room, Harold was awake, his eyes open but distant. He looked tired in a way that went beyond sleep. "She said something?" Harold asked when Jaden sat beside him. "Doesn't matter," Jaden muttered, but it did. Later that day, David approached Jaden in the hallway, his tone quiet. "She's not handling this well," he said, "you being here." Jaden didn't know how to respond. "It's not you," David continued. She never forgave him for what he did." Jaden nodded. He knew. They both knew. "I told her it was just for a few days," David added, "but she's already talking about putting you 2 in a hotel." Jaden's stomach turned. "Can't walk more than 10 feet without rest. He needs medical care, prescriptions." "I know," David said quickly. "I'll talk to her. Just hang on." But the talk never happened. That night, David left for a business trip, one planned long ago, unavoidable. Jaden felt the change in the air the moment he closed the door behind him. Carol's coldness hardened into something sharper. She no longer made eye contact. She no longer knocked before entering the guest room. On the second morning after David's departure, she entered at dawn, her arms crossed over her chest. "You need to go," she said. Harold sat up slowly, blinking in confusion. "Carol, I told David you could stay until he got back, but he's not here now, and this was never supposed to be permanent." Jaden stood, his voice low. "He's not well. You know that." "He's your responsibility, not mine," she said. "I'm his son." "No," she snapped. "You're not. You're the reason he forgot who his real family was." Jaden's breath caught, but he said nothing. "You can pack your things. You need to be gone by noon." Harold's hands shook as he pulled the suitcase out from under the bed. Jaden helped him dress, buttoned his shirt, laced his shoes. Carol watched from the hallway, arms folded, face expressionless. They stepped out into the daylight, the suitcase clicking softly over the driveway. No one waved goodbye. No one followed. The door closed behind them with a quiet finality. The city stretched before them, cold and unfamiliar. Jaden hailed a cab and gave the address of a cheap motel he had passed on their way in. Harold leaned against him, too weak now to keep his head up. His breaths were shallow, eyes closed. The motel room was small, its carpet stained, the air thick with old smoke. Jaden helped Harold into bed and sat beside him, watching as the old man drifted into sleep. Outside, traffic groaned. The city did not notice them. They were ghosts already, unseen. But inside the worn leather suitcase resting by the foot of the bed, wrapped beneath layers of sweaters and files, slept a fortune large enough to rewrite everything. And none of them, not Carol, not her children, not even Jaden himself, had yet grasped what that suitcase truly meant. The house behind them had not waited, but life, patient and strange, had just begun to turn. The room smelled faintly of mildew and air freshener, a mixture of neglect and artificial effort, as if someone had tried too hard to cover up the truth. The wallpaper peeled at the edges and the blinds were broken in one corner, letting in a single slanted ray of the gray morning. The mattress dipped inward like it had grown tired of its own weight, but Harold didn't complain. He lay motionless, his chest rising slowly, each breath an effort of will. Jaden sat on the edge of the bed, hunched forward, elbows on knees, eyes red from lack of sleep. Neither of them had spoken much the night before. There had been too much to say, and no space left for words. The previous 2 days felt unreal now, like a scene watched from a distance. The sterile hallway in Carol's house, the polite smiles that never reached the eyes, the plates arranged like props in a catalog. And then the words, cold, cutting, decisive, that had severed what little remained of the bond between Harold and the family he had once built with his own hands. Jaden had tried not to react, to stay composed for Harold's sake, but his blood had pounded with something bitter and hot. Anger, yes, but something else too. Disappointment. The ache of finally being proven right when all he had ever wanted was to be wrong. He turned towards the suitcase sitting at the foot of the bed. It leaned slightly to one side, its leather scuffed, the brass buckles dull with time. Harold had carried that suitcase with him everywhere, as if it were an extension of his body. Jaden had always assumed it held personal things, clothes, photographs, old letters, but now something about it felt heavier, like it held not just memories but secrets, the kind of secrets that could only surface when nothing else remained. Harold stirred, his fingers twitching weakly. Jaden was at his side in an instant, adjusting the blanket, checking his temperature with the back of his hand. "I'm here," he said softly. Harold's eyes fluttered open, clouded but aware. He looked around the room at the cracked ceiling, the flickering bulb above the mirror, and then at Jaden. "I suppose this is the bottom," he murmured. Jaden gave a faint, dry smile. "Not quite. The vending machine down the hall is out of order." Harold's laugh was a mere whisper, but it filled the space between them. "Do you regret it?" Jaden asked after a long pause. "Taking me in?" Harold didn't answer immediately. He reached out, slow and trembling, and took Jaden's hand in his. The skin was paper-thin, the veins like delicate rivers beneath. "You were never a mistake," Harold said. "You were a beginning." Jaden swallowed hard, his eyes stinging. "We'll get out of here," he said, more to himself than to Harold. "I'll figure something out." But even as he said it, he didn't know what that would look like. The money he had left was nearly gone, spent on the motel, medicine, cab fare. Harold needed real care, doctors, maybe even hospice, and Jaden had no one left to ask for help. That evening, the wind picked up outside. Rain tapped against the window, thin and rhythmic, like a countdown. Jaden walked to the corner store and bought soup and crackers with the last of his cash. When he returned, Harold was dozing lightly. He woke just enough to eat a few spoonfuls before drifting back into a shallow sleep. Jaden sat beside him long after the bowl had gone cold, listening to the hum of passing cars, the occasional siren, the creak of the walls settling. Near midnight, Harold awoke suddenly, his breath ragged. Jaden leaned over him, alarmed, but Harold waved him close. "The suitcase," he said. "Bring it here." Jaden did as told, dragging it across the floor and setting it at the foot of the bed. Harold struggled to sit up, his hands trembling, his face pale. "Open the flap," he instructed. Jaden unfastened the outer buckles and peeled back the inner lining. Behind it, hidden in a stitched compartment, was a key attached to a red ribbon. "There's a double lining," Harold said. "Use the key." Jaden felt along the inner wall of the suitcase until he found the concealed seam. He unzipped it slowly. Inside was a metal case, locked. He fit the key into the slot and turned. What lay within made him still. There were stacks of papers, folders sealed in plastic, velvet pouches, and several small boxes. Jaden lifted one and opened it. Inside were gold coins, each stamped and dated. Another held rings, heavy and ornate. A third revealed old stock certificates with Harold's name printed in bold ink. At the bottom, wrapped in cloth, were several leather-bound ledgers filled with transactions, signatures, notarizations. He turned to Harold, speechless. "I spent decades investing, buying things that couldn't be tracked," Harold said, his voice hoarse. "Didn't want your siblings sniffing round." Jaden opened another folder. Inside was a will dated just 3 weeks ago. It was signed, witnessed, and sealed. "To Jaden Turner," it read, "my son by choice, the entirety of my estate." Jaden sat down hard in the chair. The weight of what he held felt unreal. "I didn't know," he whispered. "I didn't want you to know, not until I was gone," Harold said. "But time is moving faster now. I want you to be prepared." Jaden looked at the document again, then at the man who had raised him, loved him, defended him when no one else had. He wasn't thinking about the money or the jewelry or the properties listed in the addendum. He was thinking of the man in the bed who had shared his last piece of toast with him on winter mornings, who had taught him to tie a tie, who had stayed up when he was sick and afraid. "You're not gone yet," Jaden said fiercely. "No," Harold said, smiling faintly, "but the road is narrowing." Jaden spent the rest of the night by his side. The metal case locked again, The documents returned to their compartment. He didn't sleep. He watched the rise and fall of Harold's chest, the tremble of his fingers, the way his mouth moved in sleep like he was dreaming something soft and distant. When morning came, the light was dim, filtered through a sky heavy with clouds. Jaden brewed coffee with a borrowed kettle from the front desk and sat by the window, trying to think, to plan. They couldn't stay here. He needed to find a lawyer, to register the will, to access the accounts. But how? He had no ID for Harold, no transportation, no time. Everything moved too slowly when you had no resources, and too quickly when your time was running out. Around noon, Harold called out. His voice was weaker. "Jay," he said, "one last thing. If I don't wake up tomorrow, don't say that. Listen to me. Don't waste time arguing with them. You know who I mean. Carol, the others, they made their choice." Jaden nodded silently. "You make yours." "I will." Harold smiled. It was the last time. That night, as the city buzzed around them, Harold passed away. There was no drama, no gasp, no final words carved in grandeur. He simply exhaled and did not inhale again. Jaden knew the moment it happened. He sat very still, his hand still wrapped around Harold's. The world did not change. The rain kept falling. The street lights blinked on. A dog barked somewhere in the distance, but Jaden felt something collapse inside him. A great, quiet end. He covered Harold's body with a blanket, not because he was cold, but because it felt right. Then he sat down and cried. Not loudly, not violently, but the kind of cry that steals your breath and leaves you empty. The kind that comes from losing something you didn't realize had held you upright. In the morning, he made the call to the lawyer listed in the documents. The man answered, professional and alert. When Jaden explained what had happened, the lawyer's tone shifted, respectful now, even urgent. "I'll meet you this afternoon," he said. "Bring the documents. Everything will be taken care of." Jaden hung up, wiped his face, and began to pack the suitcase again. He dressed Harold in his best clothes, the same ones he'd worn to Jaden's high school graduation, and waited for the funeral home to arrive. He was no longer just a son mourning a father. He was now a guardian of a legacy. The world hadn't noticed when they were thrown out, but soon it would. The air in the lawyer's office was heavy with the scent of old leather and paper. The blinds were drawn halfway, muting the outside world into dull shadows and faded daylight. Jaden sat still in the high-backed chair across from a wide mahogany desk, his hands folded in his lap. He had not slept since Harold's passing. There were faint circles under his eyes, and his posture was too upright to be natural, too still for comfort. The metal suitcase stood beside him on the floor like a silent companion, unassuming in appearance but harboring a secret that was about to upend everything. Across from him sat Mr. Ellsworth, a man in his early 70s with silver hair combed meticulously to the side, glasses perched on the end of a sharp nose, and fingers that moved with the precision of someone used to handling delicate, irreversible matters. He had known Harold for years, as a client first, then as a friend, and he treated the documents before him not as paperwork, but as a final act of stewardship. "I must say," Mr. Ellsworth began, adjusting his glasses, "your father was meticulous. Every signature, every witness, every seal. Nothing left to doubt." Jaden didn't respond. He stared at the polished surface of the desk, tracing the grain of the wood with his eyes, as if looking away from his thoughts might still them. "I've already submitted a copy of the death certificate," the lawyer continued. "The will has been registered, and I've arranged for the reading. All named parties have been contacted. Your father wanted the reading to take place formally, with everyone present. Jaden's gaze lifted. Everyone? Mr. Ellsworth nodded. Carol, Thomas, and Laura. All three have confirmed they'll attend. Somewhat begrudgingly, I must say. Jaden looked away again. He had imagined this moment 100 ways in his head. Some versions involved shouting, others stunned silence. A few had ended with apologies, but he doubted now that it would be anything other than tense, sterile, and distant, like every interaction with them had been since he entered Harold's life. The funeral had been modest. Jaden had kept it simple, just as Harold had wanted. No ornate coffin, no drawn-out ceremony. A private service at a quiet cemetery just outside the city. The only flowers were those brought by Mrs. Halley, Harold's former neighbor, who had driven in from the countryside with a bouquet of wild lilies tied with kitchen twine. No one from the family had come. Jaden hadn't expected them to, but he had watched the road leading to the cemetery just in case, searching each passing car for a familiar face that never arrived. Now, just 3 days later, they would all gather again. Not to mourn, not to remember, but to listen. The following afternoon, the office was rearranged. The chairs were set in a half circle facing the desk. Bottled water was placed neatly on a tray in the corner. The curtains were drawn tighter, giving the room a hushed, almost theatrical quality. Jaden arrived first, wearing a dark suit that didn't quite fit his frame, the same one he had worn to the funeral. He sat in silence, hands resting on the suitcase, while Mr. Ellsworth shuffled papers quietly. Then came Carol, dressed in a tailored black dress and heels that clicked sharply on the floor. Her mouth was tight, her eyes impassive behind large designer sunglasses. She removed them slowly once she sat down, revealing a gaze that flicked over Jaden with thinly veiled contempt. Thomas followed, tanned and polished, fresh from a plane, his Bluetooth earpiece still in. He glanced around the office as though judging its decor and muttered a greeting to no one in particular. Laura was last. She entered quietly, with a Bible clutched to her chest, her eyes red-rimmed though dry. She sat with her legs crossed at the ankles, lips moving slightly in silent prayer, never looking at Jaden. Once they were all seated, Mr. Ellsworth cleared his throat. "Thank you all for coming. I know this is a difficult time." "Let's just get on with it," Carol said. "I have meetings this afternoon." Mr. Ellsworth gave her a measured look, then opened the folder before him. "This is the last will and testament of Harold Turner, dated and notarized on the 12th of last month. It has been reviewed, verified, and registered in full accordance with state law." There was a pause. Then he began. "To my daughter, Carol Turner Felton," he read. "I leave my forgiveness and nothing else." The words hung in the air like the echo of a slap. Carol blinked once, her lips parting slightly. "What?" Mr. Ellsworth did not look up. He continued, his voice steady. "I once hoped you would find your way back to me. But love cannot be forced, and family is more than blood. I release you from any obligation, and I hope one day you understand what you've lost." A low sound came from Thomas, something between a scoff and a cough. Laura bowed her head. Mr. Ellsworth turned the page. "To my son, Thomas Turner, I leave my memories. You chose your path, and I do not fault you for it, but you chose it at the expense of your conscience." Thomas shifted in his chair, uncomfortable. "That's it?" he asked, incredulous. "Memories?" Mr. Ellsworth continued. "To my daughter, Laura Turner McConnell, I leave the family Bible and my prayers. May your faith guide you with more compassion than it did in the past." Laura closed her eyes tightly. Her fingers gripped the Bible harder. Then came the final page. "And to Jaden Turner," Mr. Ellsworth said, his voice softening, "my son, by choice and by love, I leave the entirety of my estate. This includes all financial assets, properties, investments, valuables, personal effects, and the right to administer my legacy. You gave me the gift of family when others had turned away. You gave me care without question and love without condition. You are the son of my heart." There was a stunned silence. Then Carol stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "This is absurd," she snapped. "He was manipulated, coerced. That boy," she jabbed a finger at Jaden, "he's a stranger." "He is the legal and sole beneficiary," Mr. Ellsworth replied calmly. "Everything was signed in full capacity of mind, witnessed and sealed." Thomas stood as well, shaking his head. "There must be something we can contest." "You're welcome to try," the lawyer said, "but I assure you the documents are airtight." Laura remained seated, staring at the floor. Carol turned to Jaden, her expression venomous. "You think this makes you one of us?" Jaden didn't respond. He looked at her, at Thomas, at Laura, and said nothing. "You used him," she hissed. "You found some lonely old man and latched on like a parasite." Jaden's voice, when it finally came, was quiet but clear. "He wasn't lonely," he said. "You just never came to see." David, Carol's husband, had entered the room minutes earlier, unnoticed by most. He stepped forward now, silent, standing behind her with arms crossed. "You knew?" she asked him, spinning to face him. "I knew he changed his will," David said. "He told me months ago." "And you didn't say anything?" "I thought maybe it would make you realize what you'd done." She stared at him. "So what now? You think he's just going to, live in Dad's house? Wear his clothes?" "I think he earned it," David said. Then, after a pause, "I'm taking the kids. I'll stay at Marion's for now." Carol's face went pale. "You're not serious." David didn't answer. He turned and walked out. The room was still. Thomas muttered something about calling his lawyer. Laura finally looked at Jaden, her expression unreadable. Then she stood and left without a word. Mr. Ellsworth closed the folder gently. "That concludes the reading," he said. "Mr. Turner," he nodded to Jaden, "I'll have the keys and transfer documents ready by morning." Jaden remained seated for a long moment after everyone else had gone. He stared at the folder, then at the suitcase. The room felt too large now, too quiet. He had what Harold left behind, but the man himself was gone. And in that moment, the weight of both facts settled fully onto his shoulders. Jaden stood before the entrance of the estate that was now legally his, holding the keys with trembling fingers. They felt foreign in his palm, not because they were cold or heavy, but because they carried a weight that had nothing to do with metal. It had been less than a week since Harold's death, and yet it felt as though the world had turned on its axis, shifting into a version of reality Jaden wasn't entirely ready for. The mansion loomed before him, tall and dignified, its structure aged but elegant, flanked by overgrown hedges and silent stone fountains. The building was beautiful in a way Harold would have loved, stately but unpretentious. The iron gate creaked as Jaden pushed it open, and the gravel crunched beneath his shoes as he made his way up the long driveway. For the first time in his life, he felt the sting of being completely, irreversibly alone. Inside, the house smelled faintly of cedar and thyme. Dust particles danced in the slants of afternoon sunlight piercing through the tall windows. The furnishings had been covered with white sheets, giving the entire space a ghost-like appearance, as though the home had been waiting for someone to wake it up. Jaden walked from room to room in silence, peeling back the covers, opening the shutters, letting in light and air and presence. In the library, he found shelves lined with books Harold would have read, volumes of history, philosophy, engineering. In the kitchen, the appliances gleamed with unused promise, too modern and too clean to feel familiar. It was a strange contrast. The man who had taught him to live simply had left him a palace. But Jaden understood. It wasn't the wealth that Harold had wanted to pass down. It was the chance to build something with it. That night, Jaden did not sleep in the master bedroom. He chose a smaller guest room on the second floor with a window that overlooked the garden. He lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet creak of the old beams. His mind wandered to the reading of the will, to Carol's fury, Thomas's scoffing disbelief, and Laura's quiet disappearance. None of them had called or written since. He didn't expect them to. There had been no bridge left to burn. They had lit the match the moment they closed the door on Harold and never looked back. The following days were consumed by logistics. Lawyers, bankers, appraisers, and contractors moved through the estate like bees in a hive. Jaden stood at the center of it all, directing, approving, signing. He hired a part-time chef, a groundskeeper, and a nurse on retainer, someone who could help manage Harold's medical legacy, as Jaden called it. He made quiet, thoughtful decisions, always asking himself what Harold would have done. He kept things modest where others might have indulged, practical where others might have boasted. But, despite the rhythm of new responsibilities, there remained a hollow space within him that nothing seemed to fill. The house echoed differently than the one he had shared with Harold. Its grandeur only amplified the absence. Jaden would often find himself sitting in the study late at night, fingers laced under his chin, staring at the fireplace. He had placed one of Harold's photographs on the mantel, a candid shot of him in the garden, hands dirty, smiling faintly at the camera. Jaden talked to it sometimes, not out of superstition, but because it felt like the only place left where his voice could reach the man who had raised him. It was on the 10th night that he found the envelope. He had been sorting through the drawers in Harold's desk, organizing old tax documents and correspondence, when he discovered a small, locked drawer near the bottom. The key had been tucked behind a loose board under the desk, just where Harold had once jokingly said he hid all the good stuff. Inside the drawer was a sealed envelope with Jaden's name on it, written in Harold's steady, deliberate script. Jaden hesitated before opening it. He sat back in the leather chair, the envelope resting on his lap like a relic. When he finally broke the seal and unfolded the letter, his hands shook. "My boy," it began, "if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and I hate that I had to leave you alone. But you're not really alone, Jay. You carry me in your walk, in your patience, in your sense of right and wrong. You are more than I ever dreamed a son could be. Not because of blood, but because of who you chose to be when no one was watching." Jaden's eyes blurred as he read on. "This house, this fortune, it's not a reward. It's a seed. Plant it wisely. Build something that matters. Let the world see what family looks like when it's chosen, not inherited. And when the nights are long and the silence feels unbearable, remember, you were never unloved." He folded the letter slowly, held it against his chest, and let the silence stretch. The next morning, something shifted. Jaden stood on the balcony overlooking the garden, inhaling the cool air with a new sense of resolve. It wasn't enough to inherit something. He had to do something with it. He began making calls. He contacted shelters, community leaders, social workers. He toured group homes, listened to caseworkers describe the cycles of loss and neglect that devoured so many children like the boy he had once been. He knew their faces. He had seen them in his own reflection. Kids discarded by circumstance, overlooked by the systems meant to protect them, waiting for someone to notice. It was then that he conceived the foundation, not in name alone, but in structure and purpose. The Turner Home, a sanctuary for displaced and abandoned youth, offering shelter, education, and mentorship. He committed a portion of the estate's fortune to the project, set up legal structures to keep it independent and accountable, and hired a board of advisors who had lived the very experiences they sought to heal. It was a slow process, exhausting, bureaucratic, and at times overwhelming, but it was also the first thing that made sense since Harold's death. Meanwhile, word of the inheritance had reached the outer circles. A few local newspapers picked up the story. Man leaves entire fortune to adopted son. Biological children receive nothing. The article was short, speculative, and cold. It included a grainy photo of Harold and Jaden from a public records file. Jaden ignored it at first. But then came the letters. Anonymous notes, threats, insinuations. Some of them from extended relatives of the Turner family. A few from people claiming they had been wronged by Harold in his younger years. Others simply resentful that someone like Jaden had inherited what he had. Jaden didn't respond. He had learned long ago that the world often hated what it couldn't understand. And he had no time for resentment. Then, one afternoon, Carol arrived at the estate. She didn't call in advance. She simply showed up at the gate, pressing the intercom with perfectly manicured fingers. Jaden watched her from the security camera feed inside, hesitating for a long moment before buzzing her in. She drove up in a sleek black car, dressed in muted tones, wearing sunglasses that concealed her expression. He met her at the door, not out of courtesy, but out of control. He didn't want her walking through Harold's home unescorted. "May I come in?" she asked quietly. Jaden didn't answer. He stepped aside. She entered slowly, looking around with a mix of awe and discomfort. The house had changed. It was alive now. Children's artwork lined one wall of the west corridor, and bulletin boards full of photographs and notes from the Turner Foundation staff occupied another. The air smelled of warm food and lemon polish, not cold emptiness. "This was never his style," she said, nodding toward the furnishings. "He wanted it lived in," Jaden replied. She removed her sunglasses. Her eyes were tired. "I didn't come to argue," she said. I've been thinking, a lot, about what I did, what I didn't do." Jaden stood silently. "I was angry," she continued. "I was scared. I thought he had replaced us, but maybe we were the ones who left first." Jaden didn't soften. He didn't harden either. He simply waited. "I wrote him a letter," she said, reaching into her purse. "I never sent it. I didn't think he'd read it. But maybe you—" She handed him a sealed envelope. He didn't take it immediately, but eventually he did. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said. "I just had to try." He nodded once. Then, gently, he gestured toward the door. She left without protest. Later that evening, Jaden sat at Harold's old desk. The envelope sat unopened beside him. He stared at it for a long time, then placed it in the same drawer where Harold had once kept his own unspoken thoughts. Some words didn't need to be read. Forgiveness wasn't always about letting someone back in. Sometimes it was about letting yourself go forward. Jaden looked around the room, the desk, the portrait of Harold above the fireplace, the laughter of children echoing faintly from down the hall. He wasn't alone anymore. He was home. And he was ready. The wind carried the sound of laughter across the garden, rising and falling like waves against the stone walls of the estate. It had been 6 months since Jaden inherited the house, the fortune, and the legacy that Harold Turner had spent a lifetime quietly building. In that time, the mansion had transformed from a solemn relic into a place filled with voices, footsteps, and the distinct warmth of life lived earnestly. The fountain out front, once dry and chipped, now flowed with clean water, its soft gurgle joined by the rustling of wind in the trees and the murmur of young voices echoing across the courtyard. Where once there had been stillness, now there was movement. Where once there was silence, now there was laughter. Jaden stood by the garden's edge and rolled up sleeves and worn gloves, his hands coated in soil as he planted a new bed of lavender near the pathway. A boy of about 11 knelt beside him, mimicking his movements with quiet concentration. Jaden showed him how to loosen the roots gently, to press the earth firmly around the base. They worked without speaking, but the bond between them was palpable, simple, unforced, human. The Turner home had officially opened its doors 2 weeks earlier. The project had taken months of planning, renovations, permits, and a kind of exhausting vigilance Jaden hadn't known he was capable of. But when the first group of children arrived, many carrying nothing more than plastic bags or silence in their eyes, all the work became weightless. The home had space for 16 children, with plans to expand as funding and staffing allowed. Each child had their own bed, their own set of clothes, a schedule, and most importantly, people who learned their names and looked them in the eye. The house had become a place of routines. Mornings began with breakfast in the bright kitchen, where the scent of pancakes and cinnamon toast filled the air. Afternoons were spent in classes, art sessions, or outdoor activities. Evenings brought quiet, reading circles in the library, soft jazz playing in the common areas, board games spread across the dining table. Some children were quiet still, testing the promise that this wasn't just another stop in a line of disappointments. Others had begun to laugh again, tentatively at first, and then with the reckless energy only children could summon. Mrs. Halley had joined the staff part-time, taking over as house mother for the younger children. Her presence brought familiarity and order, the kind that smelled faintly of mint tea and worn cardigans. The other staff members included a retired counselor who had once grown up in the foster system herself, a young teacher named Ruth who taught reading and writing, and a volunteer nurse who checked in every few days, ensuring each child's health was monitored with care. Jaden made it a point to be present, not just administratively, but personally. He helped with homework, played soccer on the weekends, repaired broken lamps, and sat with children during their moments of grief. He knew how important it was to be seen, not just supervised. He remembered the way Harold had held space for him, not as a duty, but as a choice. Jaden was determined to pass that on. Some nights, when the house had quieted and the children were asleep, Jaden would walk the hallways alone. He paused by the portrait of Harold in the front parlor. Painted from an old photograph, it captured him sitting in the garden, hat tilted, eyes squinting in the sunlight. Beneath the portrait, a brass plaque read, "Family is not who you're born to. It's who never walks away." Visitors often paused to read it, some in silence, some with quiet tears. To Jaden, it had become a prayer. The unopened letter from Carol remained in the drawer of Harold's desk. Jaden hadn't touched it since the day she left it in his hand, though sometimes his fingers hovered over it. He had told himself that he didn't need to read it, that forgiveness didn't require confirmation, but the truth was more complicated. He wasn't sure what frightened him more, that the letter might be sincere, or that it might not be. For now it stayed where it was, too late to matter, too early to dismiss. One evening, Ruth knocked gently on his office door, a soft smile on her face. "There's someone here to see you," she said. "Says he used to work with Mr. Turner. Said you'd want to meet him." Jaden rose, brushing off his shirt. "What's his name?" "Peter Langston," she replied. The name stirred something faint in his memory. Harold had mentioned it once, an old business partner, long retired, who had helped him with early investments and estate purchases. Jaden found the man waiting on the front steps, leaning on a cane, his face framed by a white beard and kind eyes. "I heard about Harold," the man said simply, offering his hand. "I was overseas when it happened. I came as soon as I could." Jaden shook his hand. "He spoke about you. Good things, I hope." Jaden nodded. "The best." Peter looked around the property, his gaze softening as he took in the sounds of children playing in the back garden. "He would have liked this," he said. "I hope so." Peter reached into his coat and pulled out a small box. "He left this with me. Told me to give it to you when the time felt right." Jaden opened it slowly. Inside was an old pocket watch, its surface etched with initials. A note was folded beneath it. "Time is the only thing we never get back. Use yours well." Jaden closed the box with care, his throat tightening. The watch ticked faintly, steady and unyielding. As the months passed, the Turner home grew into its promise. Children began to stay longer, some even calling it home without hesitation. Donors took notice, not because Jaden advertised, but because word spread quietly, through teachers, social workers, volunteers who whispered to one another that this place was different, real, safe. On the first anniversary of Harold's death, Jaden organized a small memorial. The children helped plant a tree in the center of the garden, a young oak that would take years to reach its full height. Each child placed a stone at its base, each stone bearing a name, a word, or a wish. Jaden spoke last. "This house was built by a man who had nothing but gave everything," he said. "He believed in people when they had no reason to believe in themselves. I was one of them. And now, so are you." That night, after the ceremony, Jaden sat in the garden alone. The stars above blinked through the dark canopy of sky. In the distance, the children's rooms glowed softly, their windows open to the summer breeze. He took out the letter from Carol. He unfolded it carefully. "Dear Dad," it began. "I don't know how to start. I don't even know if you'll read this. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for turning away, for letting pride and anger keep me from seeing you. You didn't deserve that. I was afraid of change, of being replaced, of admitting I was wrong. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know I never stopped loving you. I just forgot how to show it." Jaden read the letter twice, then folded it again and placed it beside the watch in Harold's drawer. He didn't cry. He didn't smile. He simply felt what needed to be felt and let it pass. The following morning, he woke early and watched the children eat breakfast, tell jokes, plan their day. One of them tugged at his sleeve and asked if he could help fix a broken toy. Jaden smiled and followed him into the hallway. Outside, the tree swayed in the morning wind, roots digging deeper into soil once untouched. The house that had been built from nothing was no longer just a home. It was a beginning. The morning began quietly, as many did at the Turner home. The dew still clung to the grass outside the windows, and a thin mist curled around the hedges and stone pathways of the garden, softening the edges of the estate. Birds flitted from branch to branch in the orchard behind the house, their wings catching the first streaks of sunlight that filtered through the trees. It was spring, full and certain, the kind of spring that seemed to have waited until everything was ready. The kind Harold would have savored from his chair by the garden path, a warm mug in hand, his eyes squinting contentedly into the light. Jaden stood alone on the rear steps of the mansion, dressed simply in dark trousers and a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled halfway up his forearms. The collar sat neatly against his neck, and though there was no one else around yet, his posture was composed, dignified. In one hand he held a single white rose. In the other, folded carefully into thirds, was the letter he had read for the first time the night before. Carol's final attempt to bridge the chasm she herself had widened. He had not responded. He didn't know if he ever would. But the letter, now softened by a full year of distance and reflection, no longer felt like an accusation or a plea. It was simply what it was. Too late, yet not entirely meaningless. The orchard path was quiet as he walked. The earth beneath his shoes was firm but forgiving, warmed by the early sun. Through the trees, the private family cemetery came into view, a small, well-tended plot bordered by a low stone wall and shaded by oaks and elms. It was peaceful here, intentionally so. When Jaden had chosen the site, he had walked every inch of the property Harold had left him, searching not for grandeur, but for serenity. He had wanted the old man's final resting place to feel like home. And it did. The headstone was modest, just as Harold would have wanted. No marble, no angels, no ostentation, just smooth gray granite with his full name etched in serifed lettering, the years of his birth and death below it, and a single line carved beneath them. He gave without asking. He loved without fear. Jaden knelt before it, brushing a few stray petals off the base of the stone. The grass around it had grown in lush and full, small clusters of wild violets blooming here and there, refusing to be pruned. He placed the white rose carefully at the base, then sat back on his heels and unfolded the letter. "I don't know if you'll ever read this," he said aloud, eyes scanning the ink again, "but I'm going to read it anyway." His voice didn't tremble. It was steady, low, and clear, rising softly into the morning air. He read the letter line by line, pausing only once near the middle when the words blurred momentarily. Then he folded it again and laid it beside the rose. "She's sorry," he said after a moment, his gaze on the stone. "I think you forgave her a long time ago, even when she didn't deserve it." He fell silent then, letting the wind fill the space. It moved through the orchard with a sound like distant whispers, brushing against the collar of his shirt, the back of his neck, the stone beside him. "I thought I'd feel alone without you," he said finally, "but I never have. You're in everything I do. Every time I say good morning to a child who used to sleep on a bench, every time I fix a broken latch or read the bedtime story you used to read to me, you're here." His hand rested lightly against the stone. He didn't cry. He didn't need to. There was nothing left inside him that was unresolved, only gratitude now, only memory. Back at the house, the day was beginning in earnest. The kitchen buzzed with activity, toast popping, juice pouring, soft chatter rising over the clink of dishes. The children had grown familiar with the rhythm of the home. They knew which cereal boxes were kept on which shelves, which mugs were the largest, Which adult would let them sneak extra syrup when no one was looking? They no longer walked softly or asked if they were allowed to eat. They simply lived. From the upper window of the study, the caretaker could see Jaden returning. A group of children stood waiting by the garden archway. As he approached, one of them, a girl with tightly coiled braids and a gap between her front teeth, ran to meet him. "Can we go to the pond today?" she asked. He smiled, brushing a hand over her shoulder. "After lunch." She beamed and ran back to the others with the announcement. Jaden continued into the house, where the staff greeted him with knowing nods. No one asked where he had been. They knew. By mid-afternoon, the lawn behind the mansion was alive with movement. A group of children played tag beneath the blossoming cherry trees. Others sat in the sun with sketch pads and colored pencils, their drawings scattered like petals across the grass. The pond, now properly fenced and clean, sparkled under the sun. Jaden stood at the edge of the field for a moment, surveying the scene with a quiet pride. He had done what Harold asked. Not just in the letter, not just in the will, but in the promise behind it. He had taken the seed of something rare and good and let it bloom. He wandered into the music room where a group of teenagers were experimenting with an old upright piano. One of them, a shy boy named Miles, had begun to play chords with growing confidence. Jaden sat on the bench beside him and listened. The melody was unpolished but sincere. "Do you like it?" Miles asked without looking up. "I do," Jaden replied. "It sounds like you." Miles smiled. "Mr. Turner would have liked music, huh?" Jaden nodded. "He used to hum old songs while he made breakfast. I never knew the names, but I remember the rhythm." "He'd like this place," Miles said. Jaden didn't answer immediately. He let the thought settle. "I think he does," he said finally. "I think he's here, in all of it." That evening, after the children were in their rooms and the staff had gone quiet, Jaden returned to the study. He opened the window, letting in the scent of lilacs and the faint sound of crickets. The letter from Carol remained in the drawer beside the pocket watch, beside the folded note Harold had left behind. He opened the drawer, looked at them all, and then closed it again. On the desk, a new stack of applications waited, referrals from shelters, caseworkers, and school counselors. Each one represented a child waiting to be seen, to be chosen, to be welcomed. Jaden reviewed them slowly, carefully, with a highlighter and a pen. This was not just administration, this was mission. Outside, the tree planted in Harold's memory stretched its limbs higher toward the sky. The small stones at its base caught the moonlight, each one placed by a hand that had once been homeless, frightened, or forgotten. Jaden believed, deep in his bones, that no one was too lost to be found. Before going to bed, he walked one final time through the halls, checking the locks, peeking into rooms, adjusting a blanket here, picking up a dropped book there. He paused by the foyer, where Harold's portrait hung. For a long moment, he simply stood and looked at it. "Good night," he said softly. Then he turned off the light. Upstairs, he lay in bed with the window cracked open, the breeze curling in like a whispered blessing. He closed his eyes, not with exhaustion, but with peace. Outside, the Turner home stood silent and strong. And within its walls, where once there had been sorrow, there was now only the sound of sleep and the promise of morning. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more. Check out the next video or explore others on the channel. And if you think someone needs to hear this, share it with them.